Hi, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to take a look back at some stuff that I shot back in the 80s and 90s at Rocky Mountain National Park. The one thing that the park has is the views. The mountains are right there. It has the colors you can't believe, and it has the wildlife you can't believe. I could talk about it, but better yet, let's go take a look.
The American West. Mention this topic, and two images immediately come to mind: cowboys and mountains. The cowboys of folklore, legend, and motion pictures have faded from the scene, but the mountains remain. The forces of nature relentlessly tear at these rocky sentinels, but changes in the granite walls are imperceptible to the human experience. Tall mountain peaks composed of barren rock are most impressive in their stark grandeur. But these mountains, home to narrow canyons, lush forests, and broad valleys, are not only impressive, but breathtakingly beautiful. This is a special reserve, a place for visitors to come in celebration of the majesty and beauty that is preserved within the borders of Rocky Mountain National Park. These are relatively young mountains. The land was uplifted and worn away a number of times before the forces that created the present-day Rocky Mountains began just 18 million years ago. In the past 2 million years, after the land was forced up thousands of feet above the surrounding plains, a series of glaciers eroded the peaks. These gigantic ice fields scoured the peaks and carved out lush valleys. Even after the glaciers that eroded these peaks have disappeared, the remaining mountains are still a high alpine environment. The thin air at these high altitudes can cause headaches, nausea, or lightheadedness. Hikers should protect themselves from the increased ultraviolet rays at this altitude with long-sleeve clothing and UV blocking lotions. Be prepared for changing weather conditions anytime you are in the park. Weather changes can be abrupt and severe. The mountains are far from the moderating effects of an ocean. As westerly winds carry moisture against the mountains, the air is lifted, cooled, and water in the air condenses and falls as rain or snow. In contrast to the age of the mountains, the park is less than 100 years old. It was established in 1915, becoming the 10th park in the National Park System. Today, more than 3 million people visit Rocky Mountain National Park each year. Many of them simply drive across the park and never leave their cars. For these visitors, Trail Ridge Road crosses the park from east to west. It crosses the Continental Divide on a windswept tundra that is often blanketed with clouds. The impact of the automobile on the park cannot be overstated. Sweet-tasting antifreeze from overheated cars near the top of Trail Ridge Road attracts these bighorn sheep. Cars stopped on the roadway to watch wildlife create long traffic jams. Through it all, these car-bound tourists miss the true experience of the mountains, an experience which is readily accessible just beyond a parking lot. One of the most exciting and enjoyable aspects of a visit to Rocky Mountain is the chance to observe wildlife in a completely natural setting. Elk, the largest mammal in the park, is also one of the most abundant. It's easy to spot a couple of young bulls or a herd of females with their calves moving through the underbrush along a trail in the late afternoon light. You are less likely to see a coyote, an animal that may well survive the coming winter by scavenging off the carcass of a young elk that can't survive the rigors of the cold and snow that lie ahead. Observe and photograph wildlife with binoculars and telephoto lenses. This is too close. These young bull elk are still wild and unpredictable animals. If you want to see sheep, there's no better place than Sheep Lake in Horseshoe Park. Mid-afternoon brings a flock of ewes and their lambs to feed on the lush greenery at the shore of this small lake. At some unknown signal, the herd leaves the lakeshore and heads for higher ground. The parade continues on the slope above the lake as the herd heads across a bald rock face on the way to higher pastures. While the ewes and lambs feed at lower elevations, these bighorn rams are content to stay high above the tree line. Back down in the valley, late afternoon sun shimmers off the waters below a small but highly effective beaver dam. Wait until dusk for a good look at these industrious creatures, feeding on willow shoots along the bank of their pond. A young beaver, known as a kit, swims by under the watchful eye of its mother, ever on the lookout for any signs of predators in the area. After circling to make sure that the pond and its shoreline is clear, the large female neatly slips beneath the surface of the pond. The best way to see wildlife and experience the tranquility of a wilderness setting is by leaving the car behind and exploring the park on hiking trails. Before setting out on a hike, stop at a visitor center for literature and information on weather and trail conditions. The first trail is a half-mile wheelchair-accessible boardwalk over the Hidden Valley Beaver Ponds. The parking lot at Rainbow Curve on Trail Ridge Road provides an overview of the series of beaver ponds that line the floor of Hidden Valley. This complex of boardwalks gives hikers an intimate view of the life of a beaver pond. Multiple small dams, all in perfect repair, create a whole series of shallow ponds throughout the valley bottom. Some of the dams are quite complex, reflecting a degree of engineering skill that is hard to attribute to such a small creature. When was the last time you got a good look at a brown trout right below your feet? Still cameras, video cameras, no camera at all. The scene before you is magnificent, and no tools are necessary to capture it. Watch as a mallard probes the bottom of the dam for tender green shoots to feed on, then swims away with the bright sunlight reflecting off his brilliant green feathers. Meanwhile, a female mallard preens and splashes in the crystal clear water provided through the industrious efforts of the beaver colony. This boardwalk is just one of the projects undertaken by the Park Service to increase accessibility for handicapped individuals throughout the national park system. The boardwalk section of the trail heads back over a marshy area before returning to the trailhead via a smooth path along the shore of the pond. In the southeast corner of the park, a complex of trails begins from the parking lot at Wild Basin Ranger Station. The hike to Calypso Cascades is a 3.5-mile round trip with an elevation gain of 700 feet. The initial portion of the trail is a broad path through a deep forest of pines intermingled with smooth barked aspen trees. Just a quarter of a mile from the trailhead, the trail passes close to a turbulent cascade on St. Vrain Creek. Water passing over the rock structure at the head of this section of rapids forms a beautiful, small waterfall known as Copeland Falls. A short distance upstream from the falls, the water cuts its way through a narrow channel between massive boulders. All along the trail, moisture-loving ferns and wildflowers carpet the forest floor. Alders and aspen intermingle with spruce and fir trees in this magnificent setting. Portions of the trail leave the deeper forest to follow the banks of the creek as the trail gradually rises from the trailhead. Here, a massive granite outcropping slopes down to form one side of the creek bed. 1.5 miles from the trailhead, a hiker stops to photograph the creek from the vantage point of a sturdy log bridge. The whitewater course of the creek bed below the bridge is definitely worthy of his attention. Beyond the bridge, the trail rises much more steeply as hikers ascend a series of stair steps on the way uphill. The steeper section of the trail is matched by the rushing stream, now located more than 20 feet below the trail. One more level section takes hikers across a small bog full of ferns and marsh marigolds. A signpost and another log bridge marks the destination of this hike, the Calypso Cascades. The boulder-strewn hillside that forms the Calypso Cascade nourishes ferns, mosses, and even large evergreen trees, precariously balanced in the middle of the stream. From here, hikers can continue another mile up to Ouzel Falls, or return to the trailhead by retracing their steps. The trail to Cub Lake begins in the beautiful meadow near the Moraine Park campground. The trail is a pleasant 4.5-mile round trip with an elevation gain of 540 feet that begins at a bridge over the Big Thompson River. The first portion of the trail crosses the river and then heads into a small stand of ponderosa pines. The early morning calls of scores of small birds fills the air. The path then crosses a meadow littered with large boulders deposited by the glaciers that form this valley. Soon the trail turns up the valley toward the snow-capped peaks that frame the spectacular landscape. The still waters of a beaver pond double the beauty of the scene as the mountains appear reflected in the quiet pool. The beauty of the grand scope of the valley is also present in a smaller scale, like the bloom of a wild rose growing alongside the path. The trail leaves the bottom of the valley and heads up the hillside into a forest of spruce, fir, and an occasional ponderosa pine. The evergreen forest closes in as the trail steepens on the final ascent to the level of the lake. A small trail sign that marks the side trail to the Cub Creek campground is an indication that the lake itself is just ahead in the lush subalpine valley. Cub Lake is a small clear lake surrounded by deep forest and covered with thousands of yellow pond lilies. The tranquil waters of this beautiful lake reflect the snow-capped peak of Stone Mountain, rising majestically in the distance. Continue up the hillside for an overview of this remote alpine gem nestled in the beautiful valley below. From this point, hikers can return to the trailhead to complete the 4.5-mile hike, or, if time and energy permits, they can continue on via a connecting trail to make a more interesting loop trail. On this hike, the trail will continue another 1.25 miles to the Big Thompson River. Then take a 2-mile round trip up Fern Creek to Fern Creek Falls. Then return to the original trailhead via the Fern Lake Trail. This variation adds 4 miles to the Cub Lake Trail, making the total distance for this hike approximately 8.5 miles. After crossing the ridge just beyond Cub Lake, the rocky trail heads steeply downward. Openings in the evergreen forest provide views of the snow-caps of Stone Mountain, the depths of Forest Canyon, the source of Big Thompson River, and off to the east, the rocky cliffs of Beaver Mountain. On the way down into Forest Canyon, a bridge crosses one of the many small streams that drain the mountainside. In the moist banks of the stream, a solitary columbine exhibits the beauty that makes it the state flower of the state of Colorado. 1.25 miles from Cub Lake, the trail reaches a bridge over the Big Thompson River. The river's roar blots out all other sound as it cuts its way through a narrow chasm in the granite rocks. From the river, follow trail signs leading to the path that heads back up the side of the canyon toward Fern Lake. The steep trail follows the banks of Fern Creek. This hike will just go up 1 mile to Fern Falls, then return to the Big Thompson River. Fern Falls is littered with boulders and weathered logs that have been carried downstream by this small but powerful creek. It's a good place to stop and rest before returning 3.5 miles via the Fern Lake Trail to the original trailhead for Cub Lake. Trail Ridge Road is the highest continuous paved road in the United States. It provides superb access to a windswept tundra that would otherwise be out of reach except for a few adventurers. Bristlecone pines, distorted by the gales that blow across the mountaintops, lie almost parallel to the ground. Those that do remain upright take on a flagpole appearance, testifying to the power of the prevailing westerly winds. The parking lot just beyond the rock cut near the top of Trail Ridge Road is the 12,100-foot high start of the Tundra Trail. This self-guiding half-mile round trip with minimal elevation change can still be a challenge because of the thin air at this altitude. The trail rises steadily toward a rocky outcropping at the top of the ridge. Even at this altitude, a broad assortment of wildflowers bordering the path provides a beautiful counterpoint to the broad, barren feel of the tundra. Near the top of the ridge, strange rock formations show the effects of differential erosion. The white rock at the bottom of the column eroded more quickly than the harder red rock capstone. The result is this mushroom-shaped formation sitting high atop a mountain ridge. Pay close attention to crevices in the rock formations. It's a great place to see marmots scurrying about in search of their next meal. From this elevated viewpoint, hikers can look back across the paved trail toward the trailhead and beyond to the majestic snow-capped mountains at the crown of this wonderland. Turn from the windswept reaches of the tundra to a popular but much lower destination. The trails at Bear Lake can be reached via a shuttle bus that takes visitors to the trailheads at this popular alpine destination. Just beyond the parking lot, an information station and restrooms provide a jumping-off point for day hikers. The 3.5-mile round trip to Emerald Lake has an elevation change of just 600 feet. The point to remember, however, is that the trailhead is 9,500 feet above sea level. The trail will take hikers past Nymph Lake and Dream Lake on the way to Emerald Lake, a small lake at the base of a rock fall below a small glacier. Just a half mile from the trailhead, the small lake known as Nymph Lake lies nestled in an evergreen forest. The trail skirts the shore of the lake and resumes its uphill direction. From a clearing on the north shore of the lake, the rocky cliffs that surround the lake pale in comparison to the rocky summit of Hallett Peak off in the distance. The trail is definitely uphill all the way. Be sure to take your time, stop to get your breath, and enjoy the beauty that surrounds you. A great place to stop is the bald rock overlooking Nymph Lake. From here, the foothills of the Rocky Mountains stretch out to the far horizon. Just beyond the bald rock, a trail sign marks the way to Dream Lake, the second lake on this rocky trail. A small footbridge carries hikers across a small stream that courses through a grove of evergreens at the base of towering granite cliffs. Just beyond the evergreens lies Dream Lake, a small alpine pond framed by Hallett Peak on the left and Flat Top Mountain on the right. The trail skirts the shoreline as it continues its way upward, now nearly 10,000 feet above sea level. The last portion of the trail is also the rockiest and the steepest. It climbs over rocks that flaked off the surrounding cliffs and are beginning their ultimate journey down toward the valleys below. Finally, the trail ends at the shore of Emerald Lake. The rocky walls that surround the lake rise abruptly from the shoreline toward the rock saddle between the towering mountains that contains a small glacier. For individuals unable to make the moderately strenuous climb to Emerald Lake, the 1/2-mile Bear Lake Nature Trail is a perfect alternative. This half-mile loop on a relatively level path can be navigated by persons in wheelchairs, as long as they have some assistance. Bear Lake is another crystal clear alpine lake carved out by glaciers that also form the other lakes below the sharp cliff of Hallett Peak. The trail follows the shore of the lake, gently rising and falling with the terrain surrounding this idyllic body of water. A convenient bench is a perfect place to sit and take in the magnificent scene, dominated by Long's Peak, the highest point at the left of the picture. At 14,255 feet, Long's Peak is the highest mountain in the park. The beautiful scenes found all along the path are the reasons this hike is one of the most popular hikes in the park. A granite outcropping on the northern shore of the lake is a spectacular sight for a little refreshment. At the far shore of the lake, the trail squeezes between the shoreline and a tall granite wall that extends almost down to the waterline. The path returns to the starting point of the loop after passing a field of boulders left in random places by ancient glaciers. The vast majority of visitors to Rocky Mountain National Park arrive during the peak summer months. There is another, perhaps even more beautiful season. Autumn colors bring a fantastic change to the mountains. Aspen turn from silvery green to a brilliant gold. Elk begin to gather in herds as bulls collect and prepare to fight to protect their harem. Here, a magnificent bull elk, showing the typical herding posture with the head held high and the antlers parallel to its back, rounds up 2 more cows for his harem. There is no doubt that he is the master of this herd. Changes also grip the valleys as grasses begin to brown in preparation for the season that is to come, and come it will. Soon the land is locked in the frozen mantle that will hold it until the warmth of spring returns to renew this magnificent wilderness, Rocky Mountain National Park.
If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series.